Hello YouTube, and welcome to an all new Elder Scrolls lore video. Today we'll be talking about the lore related to the Palace of Kings in Windhelm and how it affected the history of Skyrim as we know it. We've personally gotten to see two variations of this ancient structure, both in the Elder Scrolls Online and Skyrim, and though it served as the seat of countless wars, it still withstood the test of time. History on this place stretches far back to the times of Ysgramor and to the time of the Return, which was an event that indicated the return of man as a whole to Tamriel. The Palace of Kings is a testament to the history of the Nords and men on Tamriel, so let's dive deeper into everything that encompasses. First, let's start off with the events that led to the creation of this famous palace, starting with Ysgramor. Ysgramor is a figure that we know plenty of. He was the mighty leader of the 500 companions, and the harbinger of us all, is what brought his name to such great fame. He is the one that managed to rally some of the fiercest warriors of Atmora in an attempt to settle his people on Skyrim. Years prior to this conquest of repopulation though, the majority of the Atmoran population still resided on Atmora, but a few of them occasionally travelled to Merith, the place which they called Skyrim, in order to escape the civil war that was raging on Atmora. Ysgramor and these small pockets of settlers were generally peaceful, only really to wanting to explore the land and settle there, at least temporarily. Over the years, the marvelous settlement of Sarthal started to flourish and it became the main hub of all Atmoran activity in Skyrim. This settlement actually angered the ancient Falmer or Snow Elves, who settled through the entirety of Skyrim already and called the region their home. Although there were attempts from both the ancient Falmer and Atmora to coexist peacefully at the time. But the Snow Elves saw the growth and expandability of the Atmorans as a threat, which led to even more turmoil and hatred. All of this tension resulted in the Night of Tears, possibly also with involvement of the Eye of Magnus, which we see in the College of Winterhold questline, which was an event that led to the quick sacking of Sarthal at the hands of the Snow Elves. History writes this event as a night of swift genocide and pillaging, catching the Atmoran settlers completely off guard. The Snow Elves proceeded to burn the parts of the settlements to the ground, with only 3 surviving Atmoran settlers managing to escape the heat. These 3 survivors were Ysgramor and his sons Ingol and Ilglar. These 3 survivors then returned to their homeland of Atmora, where they told the tragic tales that befell them at the settlement of Sarthal at the hands of the Snow Elves. Soon enough, Ysgramor had waked up enough anger against the Snow Elves with his home population that he had had enough support from his kinsmen to lead a large fleet of warriors to avenge the fallen brethren in Skyrim. The fleet that went underway consisted of the 500 greatest warriors of Atmora and would be known as the 500 Companions. Although it's likely that they had far more than 500 people with them, but that's what the legends tell us. The return to Skyrim with this army wasn't easy, because Ysgramor unfortunately lost his son Ingol on the way back to Skyrim in an incident of separation in the Sea of Ghosts. After the 500 companions landed on Skyrim, the first thing they did was take back Sarthal to prove a point. They exterminated all the Snow Elves there and took back the city. Then they started to conquer Skyrim, and Ysgramor ordered that the creation of a great city would begin south of his son Ingol's burial place, which is a dungeon that we can find in the game as named Ingol's Barrel in the Elder Scrolls V. The great city, however, that would be built south of that grave would be known as Windhelm, and its creation was commissioned by Ysgramor himself so that he could have a palace from which he could see Ingol's Barrow while he was ruling. That way from the palace he could always see his son. The palace was placed in the northernmost reaches of the city as a symbolic gesture, as a stand of resistance to the wind of the Sea of Ghosts that caused the death of Ysgramor's son. This is the reason behind the creation of both Windhelm and Ysgramor's palace, aka the Palace of Kings. After the death of his son, Ysgramor spent years establishing his dynasty and driving out the elves from both Skyrim and Solstheim, and he was planning for all of these conquests within the confines of this palace, presumably. Ysgramor's dynasty endured within the walls of the palace up until the death of the king Borgas in the year 369 of the Forest Era. Although Ysgramor's line ended with Borgas' death, the Palace of Kings continued to serve all kings who resided in Windhelm, even during the War of Succession, which was a civil war in the First Era. And it would continue to stand as a staunch reminder of the Atmorans and their Nordic heritage. Moving on to the Second Era, however, in the year 572, a large fleet coming from Akavir under the command of the Kamal general called Alasum Dir Kamal landed on the northern shores of Skyrim, bypassing the shores of Vvardenfell and Solstheim altogether. Windhelm was completely caught off guard by this Akaviri fleet, and the city itself was brutally sacked shortly after. The Palace of Kings was actually the main target of this sacking, and it fell into an utter state of disrepair. The Akaviri invaders burned, looted and ravaged the entire palace, also killing off all the nobility that once used to call it home. Except one, which was Prince Euron, who was in Riften at the time of the invasion. He, together with people from Riften and all around Skyrim, battled his way to Windhelm, but it already proved too late to prevent the death of the entire noble family. Witnessing this, he asked the Greybeards for help in stopping the Akaviri forces from doing much further damage to Skyrim. Prince Yoren would later be crowned as High King Yoren of Skyrim after the Akaviri were overcome. This put High King Yoren in charge of overseeing the gradual repair of the entire city, putting the repairs of the city before the palace, as the Palace of Kings lays in ruin. Daring scavengers took advantage of this and stole pieces of stone from its ruins, which is how the sacred stones of the palace ended up in various Nord homes during the entire Second Era. Repairs on the palace itself were nearly finished sometime after the year 582 of the Second Era, but it was once again sacked then, and this time by the Greymoor vampires in conjunction with the Icereach Coven. Little is known of the Greymoor vampire sacking, but I assume it wasn't as bad as the Akaviri sacking of the palace years prior. Although when we see the palace in the Elder Scrolls Online, it's not as grand as in, for example, it is in Skyrim. So between the Second Era and the Fourth Era, there have definitely been some repairs to the palace. Over the next few centuries, the palace stood strong and was presumably repaired. It served many legendary kings of old, kings that have either waged wars or ushered peace and diplomacy. At some point during the period of time between the Second and Fourth Era, likely during the Septim Empire, the Palace of Kings became less and less lived in by actual kings and the High Kings of Skyrim. They would usually seat themselves in solitude rather than Windhelm in the Blue Palace. Rather, the Palace of Kings would usually be occupied by the Jarls of Windhelm, the most recent of whom we know in the Fourth Era was Hauk Stormcloak, father to Ulfric Stormcloak, who would start to occupy the palace after his father's death and his ascension to Jarlhood himself. If you want to know more about Ulfric's father and some of his notable ancestors, you should watch my video on his family and ancestors, which is also in the description. Either way, around the time of Skyrim in the Fourth Era, the Stormcloak Rebellion was officially formed, and after the death of High King Torygg in solitude, the Skyrim Civil War started, and Ulfric Stormcloak used his position as Jarl to both rally support within the eastern parts of Skyrim, and then also use this ancient city of Windhelm and the palace as bastions of the pro-Nord war effort. He used the palace as his main base of operations, and that allowed Ulfric to utilize its history and its significance amongst the Nords in his sort of propaganda. He cleverly used the sense of pride that the palace represented to further legitimize his claim as the High King of Skyrim. That may be one of the reasons why he received so much support in the first place. He inherited the throne to the founding city of men that was still standing in Skyrim. By the time that the Great War ends, Skyrim and most of the Nordic population was starting to feel like they were losing their cultural identity, which is why modern Nords started to furiously cling on what's left of their ancestors and former greatness, and thus to Ulfric, because he's in the Palace of Kings, among other things, and stands up for their Nords while the Empire is ruling over them. The Palace of Kings is a perfect reminder of that former greatness, which is why whoever walks those halls bears the burden of an entire nation. Anyway, that was my video on the Palace of Kings. A huge thanks to my friend Sid who helped me research this video. And, as usual, also a lot of thanks to my Patreon supporters. Mr. Bernardo Binda, Gabriel Binda, Sword of Bushido, Sar Mikhail, and Mr. Christmas. These guys, along with all the others on screen, keep these videos coming because they keep my channel alive. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's the last video of the 5th year of the channel. Next video will be the 6th year of the channel. So yeah, see you next channel year, I suppose. Bye bye. Hope you return next season, next lore season for the next lore videos. Bye.